my advice on the permitting side, on the development side, think about these things before you buy. Use that diligence period wisely, ask good questions, hire consultants, spend $1,000 now to save $10,000 later, and know what you're buying and know the status of what you're buying in terms of permitting and permitting history.
Hi, this is Michael Travis with the Waterfront Agent Podcast. Today we are joined with Ari Pollack. He is a New Hampshire land use lawyer and shareholder and director of Gallagher, Callahan, and Gartrell, PC. So here we are. Welcome, Ari.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, how are you? Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
I'm a real estate attorney in New Hampshire, practicing almost 30 years. I have a focus on land use and environmental permitting and a bit of a sub-practice in shoreland development. So I was drawn to your background as well, knowing that you've brokered a number of shoreland projects, and there are a lot of complexities for sure.
Well, especially now everything's changed in terms of,
Yes.
and I'm still even learning about that because there's so many different situations there. And so do you focus primarily on commercial or regular homes?
It's changed over the years. I would say back in the 2000s, the shoreland practice was quite residential, and that has really evolved into what's now the popular mixed use project. And so you've got somebody who wants a commercial element, but the residential side is still very hot.
Yes. Now, as I'm sure you're well aware, the whole setbacks and the whole process of buying a property certainly has changed in terms of, we used to have site assessments, what was called a site assessment, and now a buyer is required to do a septic inspection for a house, and then if it shows it's failing or has failed, then it's put on more the buyer that the septic needs to be replaced within 180 days. Is that the simplified explanation?
It is. So there's an assessment study that is required for the transfer of a shoreland property that is supported by a septic system. And it's on the seller to do that survey and study and provide the results to the buyer. It's on the buyer to decide whether they're satisfied with it, whether they want to do something about it, whether they want to further study or examine a piece of the system. But it does tend to reveal problems. A lot of these properties, as you know, have been developed for decades. The systems are old. Some of them predate septic permitting requirements. And so some of it is a fact-finding mission. What is there and what is its status? And then the flip side, of course, is that a problem is exposed and needs to be remedied.
Yeah. So for instance, a property I'm working on that has like 5 cabins from the 30s.
Right.
Each of them has like basically a hole in the ground as a septic, and which would not pass any mustard.
Right.
Some are within the magic 250 feet from the shore. Some are beyond it. It's my understanding if there's any issues that the state is only concerned with what is 250 feet or less in terms of having to do anything about the septics. I mean, these would never pass anything,
There's nothing wrong with an old system that's functioning. It's when it's not functioning that we've got a problem. The state certainly does care in terms of their shoreland protection program, what's going on inside of 250 feet from a water body. But there's a whole other subsurface bureau of DES to be concerned with septic loading and performance of septic systems. And so, I would say that you could certainly get a letter of investigation or a letter of enforcement for a system, regardless of how close it is to a water body. But those old 1930s cabins with the cesspool systems, the oldies but goodies, they're a problem waiting to happen, and the state knows it.
Right. So I read somewhere that would be pretty much automatically determined as failing because it's not even remotely an acceptable system. even though
Certainly not a
say,
modern engineering design, that's for sure. And it would raise an eyebrow just by nature of the age and design. It probably is not offering any kind of treatment, and it has to be pumped so often that it is not efficient for the owner either.
right, right. So, yeah, because there's a lot of questions that, you have sellers, I think, well, but it works fine. I put Ridix in it and done.
Right, right.
I don't believe Ridix is a septic system, right?
I think that sellers are always glass half full when they're looking to sell something, and buyers, of course, are typically much more weary of what they're stepping into.
Well, yeah, I mean, because they're the ones going to have to deal with it in the
They're
future.
inheriting a problem or a potential
That's
problem.
right. That's right. Yeah, I know of another situation where it was multiple cabins. They're all within 250 feet, really within 150 feet. And so what had to be done is a new plan had to be designed. And of course, it was like 7 cabins, which is, I mean, seasonal, but still 7. And it became like a $85,000 design to be done, But
Not
then,
surprised, yeah.
But then you get a really nice system, which could probably turn everything into a year-round, and that increases the value, I would think. So,
Well, that's the rub, right? I mean, you've got to invest in your property and make sure that it's set up to last, but there is tremendous upside in these shoreland markets where these properties really hold and appreciate in value.
right. Well, that's why we like waterfronts.
It's a wonderful place to be if you can
That's
afford
right.
to be there and stay there.
Well, you mean like this?
Very nice. I saw that.
So now when it comes to a much larger project, have you dealt with some very complicated, well, you like multi-use, you got commercial and residential, and the loading capacity, if it's not, I mean, it's got to be huge if it's not on a city system, which I run into a lot of people who come up here and says, you mean there isn't city water and sewer? I said, well, it's also a dirt road. So it's like,
exactly. That isn't plowed in the winter.
Right. Right. And they don't like associations because they can't get past the first 3 letters. But, from a standpoint in your experience, are you very much involved with the whole design process and helping people through what's going to be a potential, what they're going to be working with in the future?
I am. I'm very much involved in the design and approval process, and that's the primary focus of my practice. Whether it's a buyer or to occupy and own, or a developer who wants to, take something apart and rebuild, or just simply scrape a property and start over. Yes, I'm very involved in the permitting process, either for someone who has land under agreement or someone who has already purchased and has a development program that they're pursuing. And all of the things that you're mentioning are top of mind, right? Is there wastewater? Is there capacity if there's sewer? Is there a water source? Has it been tested? What are the slopes and erosion control measures that are required for construction near a shorefront property where you are almost always grading towards a water body? Is there a traffic concern? What type of road are you coming out on? Is it a municipal road? Is it a state road? Or God forbid, is it a private road? And all of the concerns that go along with that. And then once you're in construction, of course, who are you going to do business with? Are they qualified for the project? Have they done shoreland work? Are they familiar with the constraints of a very tight waterfront site with the types of erosion controls that are needed to protect the resource? There's, as you, I'm sure, have observed, there's nothing worse than being right in the middle of things and getting a cease and desist order because, say, your contractor has failed to put adequate erosion controls and runoff controls, and there are concerns that you're washing a site into the water.
I ran into very early on, I was dealing with Jay Boss. I don't know I'm not sure he's still there at DES. He was telling me that a installer was very proud of the work that he did. And what he did is he pretty much on the leach field packed it so there was absolutely no flow. But he was very proud of that. And every single system failed within 7 years.
Well, if it can't breathe, it can't live, and sometimes that's the end of a nicely constructed system.
Yeah, it looked good.
I'm sure it was fantastic, but if it didn't process waste, it wasn't much good to anybody.
Yeah, I ran into another situation where the whole leach field, new construction, leach field caved in, or there was a hole, like a little hole about this big, and your foot would go into a cavern that was about 4 feet by 3 feet. And twice DES was called, but the installer, when I talked to him, said, well, I didn't bury any stumps.
Right. I don't know what the problem is. Yeah.
I said, I didn't ask you if you did.
And I think that you've hit upon something I was trying to explain, which is there's a host of contractors that are very familiar with New Hampshire construction practices, but the folks that are working around the lakes and the rivers are specialized, and they understand that it's a different environment to do business in, and you've got to make sure that you've got somebody who understands those nuances. You can get it wrong very quickly, and it doesn't take much for a project to go sideways. And whether you've got a lender involved or an owner involved or you're building on spec, those delays are real. They matter.
So one of the things that I noticed, and I know one designer was instrumental in helping the state understand, which was the size of a septic tank. You know, it used to be a 3-bedroom would be like 1,500 gallons. But I think it was determined from a standpoint of how it actually works that a 1,250-gallon tank is more than sufficient for up to 4 bedrooms, just because of the bacteria, how the bacteria works and that kind of stuff. But then people think, oh, we just need a 1,250-gallon tank. Well, no, you kind of actually need a leach field.
Right. You have to have the whole system for sure. And,
right.
Yeah. And it's funny because the state's septic program revolves around the number of bedrooms.
Yes.
But as we all know, that doesn't tell the whole story in terms of how many people are there, how many people are using, is it year round, is it seasonal, is it, overloaded on occasions, is it a rental property? And so, the state's program has conservative estimates built in because of that, lack of knowledge or lack of detail. However, there are plenty of occasions where a system is designed for 3 bedrooms, but there's 10 people every night for the entire summer. The system's overloaded. It doesn't function. And now you've got a real emergency situation right next to a water body. So, this is sort of the push and pull of these programs. I'm almost always working on behalf of the developer and or owner. And they, of course, want to minimize the scope of these systems and make sure that they're not overspending on capacity they'll never need. But the disaster scenario it's out there and it's worth thinking through.
So a lot of people that I work with come from out of state, and Massachusetts is a totally different world. They have Title V, which what it looks like to me is like, oh, your septic is old, so therefore you have to replace it. That doesn't mean it should be replaced, in my opinion, but because it's got to be.
What I find here is the attitude is not so much old must replace; it's old must test. Let's find out if it is functioning, because depending upon the way the system's been maintained, the soil types and the environment that was put in the first place, it may be perfectly fine and have a significant amount of lifespan left. But testing it you'll learn a lot right away.
Yep. Well, I've also run into what happens in a situation if it fails. So I had a listing. It was a 1/4 acre lot. Literally, the septic went down. It was a pump up, like a pump way up, and leached toward the house. But it was listed as a 4-bedroom because the town has a 4-bedroom. Well, I don't think there's a 1/4 acre lot anywhere that will support a 4-bedroom. So when it failed, I said to the buyer, I said, look, understand that you now have a 3-bedroom septic. I mean, they didn't care, except they didn't sell it either. So in the same respect, I sold a house. I got hit by the big tornado in whatever it is, 2006. The whole house had to be rebuilt The whole side was missing on 0.1 acre lot. And you can't just like put a regular septic. I mean, it was just a kind of a regular septic, but it's not sufficient land. There are technologies though out there. I don't know what they're called. The bubbler system. I call it bubbler system. That can accommodate a small lot. And so many houses are small lots. So
those are real challenges for the state. And that's part of the reason that the design requirements tend to overbuild. You need to be able to replace something when it fails. And a lot of times on these smaller properties, just simply isn't any room for it, or they were developed at a time where some of these rules were not requirements. They were guidance only. And I'm familiar with any number of properties in the Lakes area that have holding tanks, no field. And the tank just simply fills up and it gets pumped out. And if you don't pump it, it's leaking. And guess where it goes?
Not uphill?
Not uphill. Right where you want to enjoy your waterfront with your family, which is horrible when you think about that.
Well, I mean, you can imagine what I've run into. So many properties on tiny lots because that's how they were, built. I had one on Merry Meeting Lake where I had the buyer, and Merry Meeting Lake being one of the cleanest lakes in the country.
It's beautiful.
And we looked at the septic, and the level in the tank never even got to the level of the D box.
Right.
So the upside is that the leach field was in perfect condition after 15 years.
Because it wasn't used.
The downside, there was a good reason why it didn't, drain. Of course, at that time, the septic inspector didn't have a camera. I said, you gotta be kidding. So I risked my life and my iPhone to take pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, from the standpoint, I mean, they obviously had to replace but that went on for like 12 years or something, and nobody knew. And even at my house, it was like when I bought it, clearly it was installed wrong because the pump up section of the tank was completely cracked and always filling with groundwater. And they put another tank next to it, so they knew it, but they never stopped the leaking of the groundwater, so the septic somehow could fill up every week.
Right.
But it had been like that since the 80s, so that's why you got to do a septic inspection.
You do. And you focused on septic so far, but there are so many other potential pitfalls around shoreland development because of that issue of the water body being the low point and the grade towards the water. Driveways are another place where you run into big problems. Is the grade of the driveway sufficient for emergency vehicle access and EMS response? Can you adequately park the number of cars that are coming to a small property on a water body? I get asked all the time, I'm buying a property in the Lakes region. Do you think it's important that I get a survey? I do think it's important that you get a survey because, one, it will tell you where your boundary lines are, and you probably shouldn't be taking the seller's word for it. And two, you might learn that your property you want to purchase is encroaching upon somebody else's property, or that they're doing it to you. And those issues also need to be resolved. And same goes with the waterfront improvements. Nobody buys a waterfront property without the intention of accessing and using the water. That's why you're there. And so dock permitting is another place where significant disputes can arise. Is your dock legal? When was it installed? Is it seasonal? Is it permanent? Do you have paperwork that justifies when it went in and whether or not it is the proper size and configuration, or has somebody taken it upon themselves without permits to add fingers to the dock or change the configuration so that slips can be added? And now it's non-conforming, it's illegal, and it's beyond whatever approval may have been issued. So there's a level of diligence there as well in terms of the waterfront. These are all places where I've been called after the fact and said, boy, have I got a mess.
Well, and of course, you can imagine I've run into that.
Certainly.
I had a situation where someone was selling a waterfront, but they only had like a 25-foot strip to the water.
Right.
And if it's less than 75 feet, I believe you have to get permission of the abutters to put a dock there.
You need permission to be within 20 feet of an extension of the boundary line, which the smaller the lot, the more likely it is that you are inside of that water setback area. So yes, you would
Right.
need to approach your neighbors and get them to agree. And a lot of times those neighbors are hesitant to consent because you're going to basically have boating activity that's right in front of their property.
Well, in this example, the neighbor on one side put a double dock on the boundary line, which is
Can't
in
do it.
itself a
Illegal.
violation.
Right.
And on the other side, the abutter didn't put a dock connected. He put a dock without being attached to the water, again, within 20 feet. So both sides refused to allow, any possibility, but both sides were also violating the rule.
You and I have been doing this a long time, and I say it all the time because it's so true. You take two people and put them next to each other on a body of water in New Hampshire, and they're going to find something to fight about. And so whether it's the dock or whether it's the driveway or whether it's the porch on the back of the house or who's renting the house, there's going to be a disagreement. And the type of scenario that you're describing about a dock being too close to the boundary line is classic, where somebody doesn't want to give up their encroachment but won't consent to yours.
Well, especially when they said, well, no, the reason there's like a 20-foot setback is so it allows you to put a boat
Correct.
there. In this case, they said, well, no, but we're going to put our boat on the other side, which is directly in front of your, property.
Mm-hmm.
And that, it was just a mess. It turned into a mess. That was after they already encroached on this little strip of land, building a garage within the 20-foot.
So, and we've had so many of these examples where we've represented parties in court on these types of disputes. And, my advice on the permitting side, on the development side, think about these things before you buy. Use that diligence period wisely, ask good questions, hire consultants, spend $1,000 now to save $10,000 later, and know what you're buying and know the status of what you're buying in terms of permitting and permitting history.
I'm sure you've never seen that people, even though DES came, they were, reamed, and then they moved docks, and then they left, and then they put the docks back. And
no, I've never seen that.
You've never seen that?
Never. I've never seen it, but I've heard a lot about it.
Well, I've seen it. I should have told you about it. So, especially
I know it happens.
Like a 50-foot, what was considered a 50-foot right-of-way for two houses on Bow Lake, and there was already a dock in the middle, which by itself was less than the 75 feet. There was a dock on the side on the abutters lot that was always there. And then the two houses, a family member bought a third house, and then they decided, well, that's going to be their access as well. So they added another dock abutting the property that my buyer bought. And it's like
with no permits, I'm sure.
No, and DES came like several times. They had to take it out, and I had to tell my buyer, I said, I know you want to buy this property, but no, you've got a right to continue the conversation with DES at some point. I don't know what's going to happen, but then it became a different problem because new agents would advertise that property.
Right.
Oh, it's got a dock slip.
Yeah.
And
How about a permit?
I said, you may want to question that, and then I have another one where the seller was talking to the buyer. Oh yeah, you can put, all kinds of new docks here and, whatever. And I'm telling my buyer and the agent, I said, there's only 100 feet of frontage here. You cannot put another dock, They didn't know, but they, but again, that's misrepresentation. That gets into another problem for, well, really everybody, agents and owners. But
agents are in a tough spot there because the sellers, of course, will tell you whatever you want to hear. And agents, I think, are walking that line between trying to facilitate a sale, but getting accurate and honest information out there. And that's why that diligence period, the inspection period, big, small, in between projects, it's critically important that you do the research and find out what you're buying. And if you are going to do any sort of a redevelopment of the property, you're hiring people who are qualified to work in that area. They're not giving you the wooded lot with no wetlands answer. They're giving you the shoreland lot with erosion control concerns and shoreland permitting answer. And those are very different pieces of analysis.
Right. So just some kind of go back to a real life situation. You have very old house. It has an old dry well, kind of a concrete tank with, sand at the bottom, clearly above the water line, although, who's to say? But as the seller or the buyer, and that's a report that can be provided, does the seller still need to, in advance, have a test pit done to determine the high water mark, or that there is no problem with the high water mark?
I think it would depend on the type of system. The tank that you're describing, if it has a leach field, then sure, I think you'd have to do those.
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't think it has a leach field. That's
right.
That's
but
what
if it's just a tank that fills and gets pumped, then probably not. And there really doesn't make any difference where the water level is, as long as the tank is intact and functional. But those are scenarios that are ripe for disagreement.
Ripe for disagreements, which is like a lot of things that we find after the fact, right?
After the fact, of course. Yeah. God forbid we think about these things before we close.
You do a lot of development versus protection, because a lot of people only think of the development part, and the neighbor might be thinking of the protection part.
Right? Absolutely. I tend to focus on owners and applicants who are pursuing a project. I do occasionally represent neighbors and abutters to other people's projects, but in order to keep things straight in my own mind and have the kind of network of consultants that are necessary, I tend to work for applicants, owners, developers, people who have the project on their table.
I mean, part of the problem is getting people to even do the work, design work, whatnot.
Right. That's a big part of my practice, is lining up developers, applicants, and owners with qualified consultants and professionals. And I tend to work in circles where we all sort of know of each other and have worked with each other. And I can point to potential clients, towards folks who have experience in these types of projects. And as I was explaining earlier, in terms of just making sure someone is familiar with the environment they're working in, that selection process is critical. The regulators at DES, the staff for land use departments in municipalities, they know who's reputable, who's qualified, and who isn't. And the eyebrows go up immediately if you've got the wrong people.
Well, and of course they have their lists. And then I've also run into, first of all, I've dealt a lot with DES, and, they're not to be scary, at all. I mean, they want to work with you.
Yeah, they're doing their job.
They're doing their job, and from a waterfront value standpoint, our lakes need to be protected. And that's, because the value of all of New Hampshire is that, and your own property is. There's a lot of issues that we have to work with, cyanobacteria and that kind of stuff. So, and number one question I get, can I add sand to the beach? Or can I, it's like, no, it's like, it's not quite that simple.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear that. They just want to, do that. And I think there's an assumption that you can do that. When I buy this, I'll just, put sand here. And I said, we can't just do that, I'll just cut all these trees down. I can't just do that,
Right.
And then I've got a 5-acre lot, they looked at it in the winter where you can't really get a test pit done 500 feet into the land, and you can't do a lot of things. And then when it's time that you can, they're all busy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's why I say, you have to have that network of consultants, people who are able to, get on a calendar, get on a schedule, get their eyes on a project. And I think that's part of the reason why there are so many contractors pulled in from other areas of work, because there's just a scarcity of consultants and contractors available.
Right. Well, and so, in unique properties, because you don't just deal with waterfronts,
Right.
because septic's in situation that I know of, it's a 5-acre property, and part of it is in the shoreland, 250 protected, and the other part is not. And then there's still a question about what the septics are, finding whether there was ever a permit pulled or that I had one where a house burned down and the septic was across the street of the waterfront. But they discovered that there was no design approval for construction, much less operation. Some
Not
people may not
unusual.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And of course, the records had burned down in the building that all the records were in. I think that happened in Wakefield and Barnes or whatever. Some towns, their records are based on the date. There's one town that I dealt with where if you want to search any document for a particular property, you have to search by the date, not the property.
Yeah.
That doesn't even make sense, but
the records are scarce when you start to go back, a half a century or more. There's a real lack of information. And some of these consultants, some of these septic engineers and waterfront designers and landscape architects, they know where the databases are. They know how to use the aerial photography. I've picked up tricks from them over the years, and I'm conversational, but they're the experts. And that information is critical. I mean, think of it in the context of a dock, where the dock permit began in the late 60s. Before that, no permits were required. And you now want to prove that a dock predates the permitting requirements, and you have been deploying it in kind ever since. You may have some old family photos that you inherit from a seller or a seller's seller, and they're passed on to the owner. Those documents and photos are worth their weight in gold because they help you to demonstrate to the state that what you've got there is pre-existing even to the permit requirement itself.
Real life example for me was a property. It was a $3 million property on Lake Winnipesaukee. It had an old boathouse. It had a huge dock, needed to be repaired. And I think the date was you had to show that it was there prior to July of 1967.
Yep.
Something like that.
1969.
Well,
that's the date.
69. Okay, so UNH has all these aerial photos that were done when Route 11 was being built.
Right.
So I was able to show that there was a dock before 1969. In fact, it was much bigger than what was there. And so that kind of relieved the question as to whether you could rebuild this boathouse,
I've had 20 of those over the years. And like I said, those documents, that historical record is worth its weight in gold. And
Right.
It really is what you need when you're going to DES to seek a permit to do a rebuild in kind or to modify an existing structure. Otherwise, you really can't make your case.
So what steps does somebody need when people call you first? They don't know. I mean, what do you tell people, like the elevator speech of why they need to talk to you?
Yeah, so it depends on why they're buying the property. If they just want to occupy as is, then it's a mission to determine is what's there legal conforming and can they occupy without threat of some sort of an enforcement action to take away what they're hoping to enjoy. And so that's, the septic assessment. That's the dock permitting research. That's the title work. Does the property rely on an easement? And is the easement properly worded and recorded? And frankly, did it come from the party that had those rights to give? And so those are sort of the pre-closing steps. But then the other question is, what do you want to do with the property? And do you have a project of your own in mind? Do you want to modify it or expand the house, expand the waterfront? How close is the house to the water? Are you inside of a protected area where your ability to expand is curtailed? Or are you far enough away that you've got some flexibility, but still have other parts of that Shoreland Act that you need to contend with in terms of an adequate amount of unaltered area, which is essentially allowed to stay in a natural state? And do you have sufficient pervious areas where stormwater and rain can infiltrate. The goal being put rain and stormwater into the ground versus having it sheet flow into the lake. And so, those questions usually lead to a discussion of what's your timing for that project? Who have you been talking to about that project? Would you like help getting a team together? Have you surveyed the property? Have you looked at the local zoning ordinance? Have you talked to a civil engineer about whether or not the site really can be constructed without special measures? What's the grade? You're off to the races pretty quickly in terms of things to think about. And one of my initial tasks is to help an owner, a buyer, get organized for those things. And then, of course, if applications are necessary for that project, and they almost always would be, helping to draft and submit and process those applications in front of both towns and the state, knowing that each of those avenues is very different.
So I hear a lot.
There's a lot.
But I hear a lot from, that dock is grandfathered.
Yeah.
Does that exist?
It does. Unfortunately, we live in a trust but verify world, especially with the kind of dollars that are at stake in shoreland real estate and development. And so, one of my questions would be, before you buy, what the seller's motivated to make this closing happen, right? They've listed the property, they want it to sell. What can they provide to you that would justify that dock is either the subject of a legal permit issued after 1969, or what documentation do they have to show that it pre-exists that permitting program, and what has been there compare to what's there today? Have liberties been taken? Has it been redeveloped? Did another slip get added illegally? And is that something that now can be permitted? They could have gotten a permit but didn't? Or is it something that now overbuilds the lot and there are parts of the improvements that are at risk?
Yeah. So, in this case, let's say you have all these 1930s cabins. They basically have a hole in the ground, but of course they added a bathroom. And now we've got a pipe, a PVC pipe, which I think is post 1930 going into it. So that's like kind of adding to an existing old septic that's not.
It's a modification.
It's a modification. So
system, right?
So a modification, does that raise a different kind of flag? That
It does. Because if you are modifying a system to add load, that requires permits. However, maybe you are making an in-kind repair and you're just using modern technology. So those are the questions that you start asking.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been a metal pipe and now it's a plastic pipe.
Right.
For instance.
The pipe rusted out. You haven't added or changed anything in the structures, but you still need to get the waste from the house to the tank. Right.
But it's not it doesn't change bedrooms, which of course would really change everything.
Right.
They're like studios, but it's really kind of what the modification was done. Do they dig more, whatever? And that's the kind of stuff that sellers may or may not want to disclose, or they forget. They have a short memory,
Well, and some sellers quite honestly don't know. They bought the property without asking those questions, so they never got any answers. They never did any particular research on what was legal and not legal. They have good neighbors that aren't complaining about them, and these things haven't come forward. And now all of a sudden somebody wants to know, what are you selling me? And they're confused by the question because they never thought about it.
Okay. Well, we've gone through, we could just talk forever, but the podcast, people don't want to, it's hard for me not to keep talking, but that's okay. So why don't you give me how people reach you?
Sure.
What's the best way to reach you?
Yep. So my name's Ari Pollack. I'm an attorney at the law firm of Gallagher, Callahan Gartrell. We're located in Concord, New Hampshire. Our website is gcglaw.com. I have a bio on the website that discusses some of my relevant work experience and practice experience. I do have a specialty in shoreland development and permitting, but I really practice land use law around the state on all types of projects: commercial, residential, industrial, mixed use, You name it, I've done it. And there's a good chance that I've been to the town or city where your project is located. And it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
It's been a great pleasure. And I will point out to everybody the fact that your office in Concord happens to be where DES is. So
that is correct. I'm right
so
down the hill, and I'm there often.
That's right. I'll point out that DES gave me a call one day. He said, "Thank you." I said, "For what?" He says, "Well, we found a picture of yours and we put a 13-foot mural on our wall, it's actually the main picture on my website." I'm going, "Well, you should have contacted me because I could have gotten you a better resolution." So it's like, but I mean, I'm proud that they, did that. And that was nice. So, okay. Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you. Thanks for tuning in to the Waterfront Agent Podcast. I'll be back with some more stories, tips, and expert interviews, and hopefully some humor. So make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode.